highlight of my parliamentary career was undoubtedly the wonder goal I scored for the House of Commons football team at the Stretford End at Old Trafford at the Manchester United Theatre of Dreams. The goal has, of course, passed into history, but less well known is the fact that the little inside forward who supplied the final pass in a move involving the legends Pat Crerand and Bobby Charlton, Sir Bobby Charlton, was the Minister of State whom I face in this debate today. We've always had civilized relations, indeed friendly relations, and I hope that they survive this next 30 minutes, for I'm going to have to say some pretty harsh things about the government's policy, and undoubtedly, as the Minister for the Middle East, he'll have to come in for his share of criticism, but there is nothing personal intended in that, as I'm sure he knows. The Minister is highly qualified as a Minister of the Crown, but the least of his qualifications was the most important qualification in being made the Minister of State at the Foreign Office. And it is this: he was previously a luminary, indeed a leader, of the Conservative Friends of Israel. And that is an indispensable condition in Britain. In the 25 years I have spent in the House, and I suspect very much longer than that, no one can be the Minister for the Middle East in Britain if they are not a member, preferably a leading one, of either the Labour or Conservative Friends of Israel. And that's the first problem I want to deal with today. It's the fact that you have to be a friend of Israel to be the Foreign Office Minister for the Middle East, which speaks volumes about the absolute unwillingness on the part of the British state, the British government, the British Parliament, to face up to its responsibility to the Palestinian people. It is the fact that in this building, the entire tragedy of the Palestinian people was authored when our Foreign Minister, then Mr. Balfour, promised on behalf of one people, a second people, the land which belonged to a third people, at a time when we didn't even possess the land of Palestine, even as an imperial possession. That is the original sin in Britain. All the blood that has flowed under the bridge since, and the fact that we don't recognize our special responsibility to the Palestinian people. On the contrary, you have to be a friend of Israel to be the Minister for the Middle East. That is central to our problems and to our credibility in the Middle East. The Palestinian people, as a result of that declaration by Mr. Balfour, had their country wiped off the map. We hear a lot of talk in the Middle East about people threatening to wipe other people's countries off the map. But the only country that has been wiped off the map in the Middle East is Palestine. Go to your atlas, Miss Brooke, and you will see. The Palestinian people were scattered to the four corners of the earth, stateless, paperless, passportless, hunted from pillar to post, regularly subject to massacre and attack of one kind or another. And all of the responsibility for that originates here. Instead of recognizing that special responsibility, we do precisely the opposite. If you're not a known and celebrated supporter of the country which supplanted Palestine, drove the Palestinians out of their country into the four corners of the earth, then you have no chance to be the Minister for the Middle East. I could adumbrate the perfidy at very great length, but I don't have the time to do so. I shall give only one example. Israel illegally holds hundreds of nuclear weapons, undeclared, subject to no treaty, subject to no inspection of any kind. And it was a British government that transferred the heavy water technology that made that illegal acquisition of nuclear weapons possible. Would have been impossible otherwise. Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons because the brave Jewish whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu told us, for which he was kidnapped in Leicester Square and ended up serving 18 years in solitary confinement in an Israeli dungeon. When brought to court, his jaws wired together like Hannibal Lecter, in case he told us any more about this illegal mountain of weapons of mass destruction. Israel has a mountain of weapons of mass destruction. Iran has no weapons of mass destruction. The IAEA says Iran has no nuclear weapons, and there is no evidence that it's trying to build them. Yet it is Iran that is subject to endless sanction and threat, whilst Israel endlessly has the red carpet rolled out before it. And successive British government, I admit that the last one was even worse than this one. Mr. Blair is now in almost permanent residence in occupied Jerusalem. But both Labour and Conservative governments have consistently backed Israeli crimes or failed to properly sanction Israeli crimes. Even when our own citizens' passports were stolen by the Israeli intelligence service for the purposes of committing murder in Dubai, we called in the Israeli ambassador and deported the Mossad representative from the embassy in London, and on the return flight, the new Mossad representative to London flew here and is ensconced still. If this were a debate only about Palestine, I would have much more to say. But the proximate cause of this debate, or my application for it, is the ludicrous situation that occurred at Prime Minister's question time a couple of weeks ago. The Minister will have come briefed, I'm sure, for this point. I asked the Prime Minister if he would adumbrate for the House the key differences, just the key ones, the key differences between the hand-chopping, throat-cutting, violent, Islamist, extremist jihadists we were now going to go to Mali to kill, and the hand-chopping, throat-cutting, violent, Islamist, fanatic, extremist jihadists that we were giving money to in order to help them kill Christians and other religious minorities in Syria. There was a reply, but it was not an answer. It was a brief ad hominem attack that if there is a brutal Arab dictator anywhere in the world left standing, he could no doubt count on support from me. Well, as the psychologists say, Ms. Brooke, this is just about as good an example of projection as it's possible to imagine. The Prime Minister projected onto me the sins, indeed crimes, of which he himself is manifestly guilty. And I will.
One of the reasons why I voted against the Iraq war, like the Honourable Gentleman, was that I was worried about the fate of Christians in Iraq, and they've had a terrible fate since that invasion. Many of them went to Syria, and their lives have been made a misery now. They are the people in between. So can he share my view that it's absolutely essential that we should not send or countenance indirectly or directly sending any arms into Syria, which could make the situation far worse?
Well, wholeheartedly, Ms. Brooke. And the Christians in Iraq have been effectively wiped off the map of Iraq. And most of them are in Syria, where they live in daily terror of their churches, their clergy, their devotees being slaughtered by these hand-chopping, throat-cutting Al-Qaeda elements that we are giving money to. But the Honourable Gentleman is wrong in this regard. We are already giving them weapons. We're giving them money, which is the same thing as giving them weapons. If you give Al-Qaeda money, what do you think they're buying with the money? Are they buying elastoplasts and other medical supplies? No, they're buying weapons with which to terrorize not just Christians, but other Muslims, other ethnicities, ethnicities, Kurdish people, for example, on a daily basis. The minister knows this. The Foreign Office knows this. And they have to give an answer. If not to me, then to the British people. What are the differences between the jihadists we're killing in Mali and the jihadists we're financing in Syria? And I know why the Prime Minister didn't answer my question. For there can be no logical answer, surely, to that question. For there are no differences. Al-Qaeda is Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda mindset is the Al-Qaeda mindset wherever it is to be found. And I demand an answer to that question. The people in this country deserve an answer. After all, it's their money that's being given. And I said to the Prime Minister, I asked him, did you read Frankenstein? Did you read it to the end? Don't you know that Dr. Frankenstein's monster broke free and out of control? And that's why it's called a monster. But as a case of projection, it's really pretty difficult to beat. In The Guardian, an American journalist by the name of Glenn Greenwald, I think the day after, if not the day after that, wrote the following: Cameron's attack on George Galloway reflects the West's self-delusions. In an act of supreme projection, the British PM accuses a critic of lending support wherever there is a brutal dictator, the core policy of the US and the UK. Who can doubt that? The Prime Minister has travelled with his sales bag and a retinue of arms salesmen to one brutal Arab dictatorship after another. I don't know where he is today, but it'll be a red letter day if he's not trying to sell weapons to a brutal Arab dictator today. Saudi Arabia is our best friend in the Middle East. We sell billions, tens of billions of pounds worth of weaponry to the Saudi dictatorship, some of which are used in other countries. In 2009, the Saudi Air Force used UK-supplied Tornado fighter bombers in attacks in Yemen, which killed hundreds, possibly thousands, of civilians. The Saudi army is in occupation of its neighbor, Bahrain, where the democracy protesters are being gunned down on a daily basis using guns bought from us. Soldiers trained by us. We have a military training mission in Saudi Arabia, the darkest tyranny in the entire Middle East, the most brutal dictatorship in the entire Middle East, is in occupation of its neighbor, killing people because they demand the right to vote. I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I was grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that actually, he mentioned Yemen, it is important that we work with the government of Yemen in order to defeat Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is causing so much damage and harm to the people there?
It is important that we work with the government of Yemen, which has come to power as the result of a popular revolution against a dictatorship supported by the British government. This one and the last one. But before I leave Saudi Arabia, we have sold £15 billion worth of weapons a year. According to a report I have here, Saudi Arabia, with whom we want to broaden and deepen the UK-Saudi relationship, is already very broad and deep and is the UK's largest trading partner in the Middle East, with annual trade worth £15 billion a year. How does the minister think people in Syria feel when they're told that we're giving weapons to jihadists to bring democracy in Syria, when our best friend in the region is the darkest tyranny of them all? I'm going to close, though, on the tragicomic, on the absurd, on the subject of brutal dictatorships. I never met Muammar Gaddafi. I've never met any of his grisly family. I had had nothing to do with Gaddafi or his regime, but the British government did. First he was a mad dog, then he was our new best friend. The Prime Minister of Britain kissed him several times in the tent. The LSE, the Libyan School of Economics, London School of Economics, was encouraged to take large sums of money from the Gaddafi dictatorship. Gaddafi's son had help from number 10 Downing Street to complete his PhD thesis so that he could become Dr. Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi. We had the closest possible relationship with Gaddafi's brutal dictatorship. We sold them £100 million worth of weapons. Worse than that, we sent them dissidents to be tortured on Gaddafi's torture tables. It wasn't me who sent them. It was the then British Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Blackburn, as the courts will soon decide, though maybe in secret, if the government gets away with its secret courts legislation. The letters are there. The man who was tortured discovered them in the British Embassy, gloating at his safe delivery to the torture tables of Gaddafi. It was the British government that was training Gaddafi's secret police and his military officers at Sandhurst. It's the British government that supports dictatorship in the Middle East, not me. I wish I had more time for this debate, but I don't want to cheat a minister whom I personally respect by leaving him too little time to reply. I just close with this, Ms. Brooke. Britain's relationship in the Middle East stinks to high heaven. Indeed, in the Muslim world, 1.7 billion strong, we're seen as hypocrites, as occupiers, as people who support and prop up these brutal dictators with weapons, with money if they need it, with diplomatic and political support if they don't. It's a pity that this foreign minister, fine man as he is, has done nothing to better that reputation. Instead, his tenure has seen that reputation get steadily worse.